So I get asked all the time, Val, what's your process? Like, how do you write so much? Well, first off, I can't answer how I write so much, because I've been writing for so long that I really don't think about it anymore. And so I guess maybe the correct answer for that is I've built it into a habit. It's part of my daily life now. I can't imagine not going a day without that stress reliever. It's more of a stress relief than a stress causer these days for me. And that has a lot to do with just persevering and just sit your butt in the chair and write, kind of like Nora Roberts always tells us. It's that principle, and after a while, it's less of a chore. It's something that I need to do, that I'm itching to do a lot of times. But regardless of that, there is a process to the madness, right? I'm always juggling several projects at once. So it always starts, because I'm very much a plotter or a plantser is how I phrase myself, because there are huge portions and elements of my stories that I just sit down and I just write it, and then I write it down or I log it. But for the most part, I do plot some things, and it's not an outline in a classic. It seems it's more of a bulleted list or groups of bulleted lists that sort of keep me on track, or at least give me the skeleton of my intent going into this story before I start telling it. So for example, there is usually an outline that defines either world mechanics or rules. These are rules that every character and creature must follow, or how it functions in a certain way. Usually I can break that down. Sometimes if I'm doing a really big fantasy piece, and of course a co-author that I'm working with is totally mind blown, because we just finished doing this process. You know, we're outlining races and just the wildlife and the different kingdoms and factions and how they interact with each other, or how they rank within each other, things like that. But it's not great detail. Those details come as we write, or as I write in this case. Then I also have an outline or bulleted list that is sort of like, there's a list that tells me what are the rules that I'm going to abide from. Like, what is the arcing theme? Is this a villain? Like, reminding myself of the genres and intent, and then like putting phrases or things in there that remind me of which decision I should be making always. Like, you know, for example, Grumpy Sunshine, right? I want to keep in mind that there should always be this feeling that one is very irritable and grumpy and dark, and the other one's very bright and giggly and happy and glowing, but for some reason they work, because, you know, this is a villain romance with Grumpy Sunshine vibes. You know, you can do things like that. And then my last and most important outline, and this outline would be pretty much one of the only pieces I might have if I'm doing a short story or a more contemporary piece, is the outline that tells me what are things I want to happen in the story and in what order. Even though I may not know the details, I might be missing points between. But this is like my honey-do list. This is what inspired me. This is what I envisioned at the start that needs to happen. It needs to come in this order. A lot of times as I make this bullet list, I'm also thinking about story beats and formula writing, and going, oh, well, I need a moment for betrayal. I need a moment for him to accept love. I have a bullet that, you know, and basically bullet out how you want those popular beats or recognizable beats to unfold, as well as things that you definitely want to happen, and make sure to add any bullet point in between these that you know is needed for either the author to feel how they need to feel before they get to the next point, or the characters are going to make the decision you need them to make because of past experience, right? We're actively molding a life, even though it's imaginary life, but we're molding a life a little bit, and we have to be mindful that the trauma we put them through will change the outcome of decisions they make later, and we have to be, or even impact the reader immersion and the believability of those decisions. Oh my god, what a terrible time for hiccups. Okay, I'm good. So once you have those outlines, those bullet points, those gathered pieces of bits and bobs that you can go back to, I sit down and I start writing. Do I write chronologically? Nowadays, pretty much, yeah, I do. I will start at chapter 1 and just keep going through the story. And then usually I'll have a revision or draft round where I realize I'm missing content, and I'll go back and start adding and expanding on those previously written chapters a little bit. So that's how my more recent writing. In the past, with my first 1 or 2 novels, I just needed to create the habit of writing. So I was writing any scene that inspired me. And yes, revisions were, I feel, a little rougher in that process than it is now. But at the same point, it built the habit of writing and getting to know my writing style and storytelling a little bit better, and having more confidence in the way I tell a story as well. So in short, I would write what I know, and as I emptied out my head, it made room for me to develop the missing chunks. Both are viable. Sometimes, from story to story, book to book, you're going to find that you write them a little different each time, and that's okay too. They don't always come to us in the same manner as that first initial love that we tend to put to paper. But once I finish drafting, once I'm done drafting and adding chapters, I walk away. I walk away for a good, I try to aim for 2 weeks minimum, and I go write something else or work on the next project, or I give my brain a rest and I start binge watching K-dramas, playing video games, helping my friends, get through their own books and things like that. I try to disconnect enough that when I go to, and then when I open to start revisions, I change the font, I change the line spacing, I change the size of the font. I sometimes change the font color and background, like a beige color for the font itself, and a dark gray or black for the page color, so that it's easier on the eye, so I can really pick it apart. But something about changing as much as I can and disjointing it as much as I can from its normal format slows my brain down and tricks it into thinking it's reading this for the first time. Now, does that keep me from plugging things in imaginary on the paper? No. But I have found I do it far less when I do this. And every time I finish a revision round and go back, again, I'll change the font size, face, and colors and things like that, and then I read it again. And something about that process of flipping the fonts around every time you're going through to do a hard comb through helps you to see what is actually on the page and keeps you from reconnecting a little bit mentally, like you were in the drafting stage, where you're just trying to write down everything that you're seeing play out in your head or that you're thinking and things like that. And typically I've noticed that I have less revisions rounds when I do it that way. So that's my self-editing routine. Sometimes if I'm nervous about a thing or have questions, I leave comments, I create like a little questionnaire, and I start hitting up my beta readers and alpha readers and be like, I need you guys to read this and tell me I'm not crazy. If I'm pretty confident after doing revisions and my word editor rating is 98% or higher, I'll go ahead and send that to my editor, to my publisher, whoever it's going, because if I mess with it anymore, I'm gonna break shit, and I know that, and that happens, and you have to be aware of that. But that would be my process from trying to work out and start writing to writing and drafting, and how I handle revisions, and how I handle when I finish each of those steps. And yes, because I have to take breaks sometimes, and sometimes I get burnt out in revisions because it's a lot of pressure at that point, I tend to be drafting another story in the meantime. And I try to draft a story that's a completely different genre, so I'm creating that disconnect and coming up for air for both of those each time I flip from one to the other until I finish. For the most part, I try to, when I have revisions going, I try to stick to that story as much as I can, but that doesn't mean that I've gotten to cornered myself, put myself in a corner, and needed some exterior support or needed to talk it out. Sometimes I literally just try to describe what's going on in the story to my husband, who has zero interest. I don't even think he's listening to me. And then I go, oh shit, that's what I'm missing. And then I go and I go away. And then he's like, oh, thank God she's gone. I can go back to painting my cool little earrings. So I could go back to whatever it is he's doing. But sometimes that's all it takes, is singing out loud. So good luck to you writers and authors out there, and hope something I've said here helps you out. Let me know in the comments. Be sure to like and subscribe my videos wherever you prefer to watch them. And happy spooky season, by the way.